Hello, it's the 16th of May. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. Welcome along. It's Renew Every Morning, and today our theme is Don't Be a Wise Guy. Well, as you'll know if you're following this series, this month our theme is wisdom and guidance. And today we have a lovely verse that really, I think, speaks to that in a kind of quite helpful way. Proverbs 3 and verse 7 is the verse I've got in my mind. Let me remind you what it says. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. Well, there you are. That's a nice statement for us. And today's invitation is a very, very simple one. Don't be a wise guy. And I mean that in every possible sense. You know, when we think about the phrase wise guy, we're always thinking about the mobster idea, aren't we? But ever before that, it was the idea, it was a kind of street talk way of describing someone who was a smart aleck. Always the talking, always wisecracking, and never listening, which was one of the great features of the wise guy. And spiritually speaking, I guess that's probably just about the opposite of wisdom. So let's break it down. Don't be wise in your own eyes. All right, well, just listen to that for a second. The Hebrew is actually very nice here. The thinking is literally, don't be wise in your own perception. This is a really, really important idea. And this isn't, of course, about the rejection of wisdom. You're never going to see that in Scripture. But Proverbs is crying out for us to get wisdom over and over and again. This is about being wise in your own eyes. So really here what we're thinking about is something a bit more fundamental. We're thinking about the idea of when we just stop learning and we stop listening and we think we kind of, we're the answer to everything. That's really what the Proverbs is driving at today. And it's saying, no, we don't want you to do that. I guess let's do it this way around. Let me do it this way to you. I was doing some work recently and I was really taken by something I learned from Microsoft. It was absolutely fascinating. When they started to really embrace the whole conversation around diversity, equity and inclusion, what they said was this: they wanted to move from being a know-it-all culture to becoming a learn-it-all culture. And that for me is real wisdom. I thought that was such an elegant way. And that's the question. Are you a know-it-all person or are you a learn-it-all person? And I think the wise person's a learn-it-all person. One of the things I always think to myself is when I was even unwise as I am at the moment, I was pleased that I know so much. Now I'm a little less smart aleck than I used to be. I'm just absolutely floored by the fact I know nothing at all. And actually there's something about that. The more I know, the less I know. That's the madness of it. That's the insanity of it. But Paul put it like this. Paul said, look, the thing is, knowledge puffs you up. But he said, love builds you up. And again, when you're on the way of wisdom, in the way of love, then you're going to be someone who gets built up. That was what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 8. And the journey of wisdom, I think, works in a very nice way. I'm going to apply a kind of a model that I used in my business world, but it'll work really nicely here. It begins in this kind, it's a fourfold path. And the first step on that path is a path of what you might call unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. And boy, oh boy, is ever a time where there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. And then move into this phase of what's called conscious incompetence. In other words, at this point, you realize how much you don't know. And then as you begin to learn, as you begin to practice, what happens is you start to move into this phase of what's known as conscious competence. You're learning, you're practicing, you're embedding, you're experiencing. And then finally, you move into this phase that's called unconscious competence, where you don't know what you know because you've become one with it. You literally are Christ-minded in things. And that, I think, is the most exciting thing you could possibly know. So the journey is from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. And it's a really nice passage if you think about it that way. So spiritual maturity for sure comes through humility, not hubris. We've said that already. And here it says, don't be wise in your own understanding. And then it says, fear the Lord. Now, remember, we've said this before, but it's always worth saying, this never saying to you be afraid of God. This is only ever telling you to be in awe of God. It's always awe. Awe and grace, not law and grace. And the Hebrew word, you've heard this before, yara, the idea here is it's reverence. Remember, it's wonder. It's that sacred pause that just sort of realigns the soul. It's a very lovely idea. Remember, it said in Proverbs 9, we did this verse together, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Remember, being in awe of God is the beginning of wisdom. So to fear God is to trust God, is to open yourself to God's guidance, if you like. It's not fear that runs away. It's the fear, the awe that draws us near. It's a very different idea. So shun evil is what the scripture says. Now this is actually interesting because this is saying to actively turn aside from distortion. Remember that evil is distortion, to move away from that, to shun it. This is not like a passive avoidance. This is an absolute deliberate pivot. And I sometimes think to myself, it's easy for us to assess, right, our own level of wisdom by observing what we run from and what we run towards. And if my life is anything to go by, I run towards things I should be running from, and I run from things I should be running towards. That's the truth of it. Wisdom just doesn't just see the difference. Wisdom really is the difference. And Scripture gives us some wonderful examples. When you see somebody who is no longer wise in their understanding, they are wise in God's sight, you see a massive contrast. And let me give you two really powerful examples. So an example of someone who's wise in his own eyes, King Nebuchadnezzar. Do you remember the book of Daniel, chapter 4 and verse 30, stretching himself out and preening himself on his palace, and he says, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built by my mighty power and the glory of my majesty?" And you'll know very well the story of Nebuchadnezzar, won't you? He gets wanders around like a wild animal. You read the story for yourself, and then he comes to his senses and he kind of regains himself and rephrases actually the whole passage. But look at King David. When David, on the other hand, is reflecting on it, he prays in 1 Chronicles and 29. He says, "Oh Lord," says David, "yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory. Everything in heaven is yours." Do you see David's perspective is completely different? Nebuchadnezzar's perception is that he's the great one. David's perception is God is great. And that's the difference. That's the difference. One looked in the mirror, the other one looked up. And wisdom across traditions agrees. It doesn't matter where you look, everybody says the same thing. This wisdom idea, it's a wisdom that's received, it's not claimed. And this is it doesn't matter where you read on that, you'll see the same thing. Without, Teresa Alves said this beautifully. She said, without humility, and that's the key to wisdom, humility versus hubris. Without humility, all is lost. And I'm a great fan of the way C.S. Lewis put it. He said, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking of yourself less. And I think that's nice. So don't live from your own limited view. Don't be a wise guy. Be humble, be teachable, and of course, be in awe. And walk away from anything that leads you away from love. And with that in mind, let's close our renew today. But may you absolutely be renewed and not be a wise guy. Have a great day. God bless. Bye-bye.